Hey everybody, welcome back to Your Full Crew. I'm Don Zola, your host today. I'm the CEO of P3 Tech Consulting and the publisher at Autonomy Global. If you haven't signed up for our newsletter, you should check it out. We have an incredible group of folks to talk to us today about our theme, military tech. And as we kind of tend to find out as we work with different people over time, we put out a theme, the guests don't coordinate, and yet all of their articles seem to align. And today, if you will, the subtext is Ukraine, because that is where military tech is really being showcased right now. So without further ado, let's kind of go around the horn real quick. We've got Eben Frankenberg he is the CEO of Echodyne. We've got Tom Furey, the CEO of Sagetech Avionics. And Bryan Sardoch is working with Orqa FPV. All right, I got it right. Bryan actually has had boots on the ground in a lot of places, but including Ukraine. So I'm really excited to hear from Bryan again about this. Thank you, gentlemen, for being on the show. Really excited to have all of you here. And by the way, everybody, this show would not be possible without the generous contributions of our sponsors. By the way, they don't directly sponsor this particular stream. They sponsor our event stream. So we had one at CES sponsored by Anello Photonics. We had one just recently at Geo Week sponsored by GNext. And next month for Drone Responders National UAS Public Safety Conference, Carasoft will be our sponsor. So thank you to all three for enabling so many things across our platforms. We're going to be talking about Ukraine, as I said, and before we jump into the first article, I do want to give some background and context. I'm sure most of you already know this, but it's been 3 years, people, 3 years since Russia conducted a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. As we stand here today, Russia still occupies roughly 20% of the country. After gaining over 4,000 square kilometers of territory. They continue bombarding Ukrainian cities. Ukraine, of course, is holding fast, primarily using drones and other uncrewed vehicles. And sadly, the fighting and airstrikes have inflicted over 40,000 civilian casualties. 4 million people are internally displaced, and 6.8 million have fled Ukraine. 14.6 million people need humanitarian assistance. That's where we are today as we kind of enter into this topic. Before we, again, jump into this first article, I'm going to have Bryan just very briefly introduce himself, then Tom, then Eben. So Bryan, over to you.
Yeah, so I'm working with Orqa FPV as a manager of our partner programs. But I started out as a deputy sheriff. I was a sheriff for 15 years, doing search and rescue, mass disaster, death investigations. I ended up getting into SWAT-related drones and technology, which turned into teaching a bunch of tactical teams, which got me over to Europe, teaching a team over there when the war started. And segued into working with some Ukrainians, really started focusing on some of the deficits our systems had, and then turned that into identifying systems that were doing really well, which is what led me to Orqa FPV.
Awesome. And we're going to be talking a lot about FPV drones today. Tom, over to you.
Good morning, Dawn, and good morning, everyone. My name is Tom Furey. I'm the CEO of Sagetech Avionics. Our company is about 5 years old now, focused on what we call airspace safety, but really it's kind of two things. In the civil airspace, which isn't relevant to today's discussion around collision avoidance, and then on the military side, IFF, identify friend or foe, which becomes very intriguing in a situation like Ukraine.
Very cool. Thank you so much. And Eben.
Yeah, hi, I'm the co-founder and CEO of Echodyne. We're a radar manufacturer, about 10 years old. Started out making radars for collision avoidance on drones. We work with Sagetech on that, but also make radars for detecting drones that are flying in airspace where you don't want them, which is a much larger business and a much larger focus for us these days, just given the situations that we have. And I've spent, prior to that was with an invention company where we actually developed the underlying tech that turned into Echodyne. So that's my background.
Awesome. Well, so great to have you on the show and to be working with Echodyne and Sagetech. 5 years, that's how old my company is too. And we've been working together almost the entire time. So always wonderful to have all you guys on the show. So let's go ahead and pop up that first article. And I believe this one is Bryan's. So Bryan, tell us, wait a minute. This wasn't Bryan's. This was Tom's. This was Tom's article. Sorry about that. Tom, tell us about this article, why you picked it, and why you think it's so important.
Yeah, so this is, thanks, Don. This is an article from the Drone Girl, and it talks about the changing face of war, especially as we're seeing in Ukraine, and really, she calls it the first drone war. But in the article, what I found interesting and intriguing about it was how it touched on all the things, not just the fact that we're using drones, but about innovation, and about how things change and how rapidly things are changing. So, for example, the article talks about using drones in war, and we're familiar, and we've, of course, been using drones in America for decades, right? And we originally used to think of things like the Reaper, et cetera, and they were using a Bayraktar TB2, very high-valued asset, cheaper then, but still kind of close to what traditional aerospace technology is like. They started to become, I don't even think they're used anymore in combat, because as this war, even though it's 3 years old, it's only 3 years, and 3 years is a pretty short cycle in terms of technology innovation. But the amount of churn in technology that we've seen as we observe this war is phenomenal, right? From using expensive, high-value assets that we've geared a lot of our infrastructure towards, and our allies have geared a lot of our infrastructure towards, to printing drones on the fly, using first-person view, which was just kind of a drone racing league, drone soccer kind of technology prior to that, finding innovative ways to use them. Not only that, using drones as weapons, or to deliver weapons, but also using drones. We're seeing a lot more. I mean, we're seeing this war unlike any war we've ever seen, right? My war in the first Gulf War, and yes, I'm that old, right, was read about in newspapers, and the occasional news report that had a lag time associated with it, and it was filtered. Now you've got YouTube with first-person drone video showing actual attacks, actual combat, the actual devastation that's going on. So we're seeing drones help us as society observe this war more closely and more rapidly. And then we're seeing that in the article, she talks about how we're seeing that rapid innovation, from first-person drones as attackers to finding now new ways to, as Eben mentioned, counter drone. And we talk a lot about that. And I just want to mention another article I've seen since then, and I can't even attribute, I don't know where, but it was interesting how it's not just about technology, because I saw another article about how Ukraine had set up a mesh to counter drones. I'm a technology guy. I'm thinking mesh radios, mesh network, how all this works. No, this was a physical mesh stretched over land to stop drones from attacking certain areas. So this article, I thought, pointed out, plus everything else we read, the phenomenal pace of change, the innovation that's occurring, and how the technology is ubiquitous, because neither side really has a defining technology in this war.
Yeah, absolutely. And before I hand it over to our other guests here to talk more about this article, I do want to attribute this actual Drone Girl contribution to Mary Lou Smolders. She's with D-Drone, and this was actually her article about how this conflict is redefining military airspace strategy. As a retired Air Force member, this is kind of near and dear to my heart, because I've been watching this closely in terms of strategy, in terms of doctrine. We're going to talk a little bit more about that, but I want to talk a little bit more about tactics, because Tom, you mentioned a literal mesh net. You mentioned, smaller drones versus the big Group 5, Preds and Reapers that we've been used to, that nation states had to buy because they were so expensive. Bryan, you literally were boots on the ground here. I heard you talk at CES on an amazing panel. By the way, article about that on Autonomy Global. Shameless plug there. It was such a good panel. Tell us from your perspective, what you think about this article in terms of the first drone war and the technology iteration that you were seeing.
Well, I think there's a lot of kind of lessons to be learned outside the war aspect as well, because a lot of the articles seem to be focused on kind of that security aspect of like these threats that are developing in war. They're not stuck in the battle space, right? Like they can, these are things that are accessible. You can go on Amazon and buy most of these parts or whatever it is. So it is a real threat in terms of our own critical infrastructure and some of the stuff we'd be worrying about here. The thing that it really brings to light for me is the fact that these low cost systems are accessible. We always talk about like democratizing whatever in these technology spaces. This is something that's a truly democratized technology with a gross asymmetric yield. I mean, you're talking about maybe $150, $200 drone able to disrupt, whole nations' power grids and things like that. I think some of my buddies, it was like a $500 drone destroying a $15 million aircraft that was sitting on the ground, and you just got to get in the right space. The leveraging of these things is really hard to put into scale. Like war is huge, but the world is also huge. The infrastructure, what do you call it, tax services and all that are really big. And I think that was something that I took away from the article was, you could sense the need for the counter drone stuff. That we've had a lot of stuff happen here in the U.S. that should bring that to our attention as well, like some of these defense needs. And it's not just defense; it's also managing the traffic, because we're going to have more and more things in the air, and there's going to be more of them, smaller, but those still present like significant hazards and risks as you go on. They said $2 billion to production of FPV drones last year, but I'd be interested to see what that $200 billion, if they could take that $200 billion of FPV drones, what's the dollar amount of assets destroyed by that in terms of just if we're going to whittle it down to dollars and cents, which I would argue that a lot of this war does come down to the cheaper system that can do the most damage is going to win over time because of just being able to fund this machine. I'd be interested to see what the flip side of that $2 billion is. Like, what's the return on investment if you want to get economic about it?
Yeah, no, 100%. I imagine it's way bigger than 2 billion, right? We've seen some, we'll call them spectacular strikes, even deep in strikes into the heart of Russia. Using small drones. So quite amazing what we're seeing out there. Eben, I'd like to kind of hand it over to you and get your thoughts on this article.
Yeah, on this article or on the one I submitted?
No, let's talk about this one. We'll get yours is actually, if I think yours is third, we'll get to Bryan's next, and we're just kind of round robining, thoughts on this particular one first.
Yeah, okay, great.
Yeah, first.
Yeah, well, I think, combination of Tom's and also this one, the development and the innovation that's taken place is just phenomenal over the course of 3 years. It's required, right? It's the spy v spy, the aggressor does this thing, and then on the defense side, you come up with an alternative, and then you got to figure out a way to get around that. And so, it's moved from these much larger drones flying by GPS with an optic on it, all controlled by some remote links, to now FPV drones that are tiny and being flown by individuals with VR goggles on, and it's just amazing to see how much innovation has occurred so quickly. And you think about, as Bryan was saying, on the critical infrastructure side, that's all becoming available, right? Thanks to the innovation that's happening here, which is frightening, right? So
yeah.
How are we going to defend against that for critical infrastructure sites if somebody really wants to, make a strike on, here or somewhere else?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Homeland and the Homeland Security is one thing, but kind of keeping it on the battlefield. This article talks about strategy, but my brain goes to doctrine, right? Because doctrine is kind of what codifies, that kind of deeper level of this is how we fight a war. Like this is, the core of what we do. And what we see as a result of Ukraine is, as an example, right, the Department of Defense setting up a counter UAS office, a joint counter UAS office with the Army in charge. You've got the U.S. Army developing its own doctrine for counter UAS. Every service is doing this, and integrating counter UAS in other unit tasks, integrating UAS into specific units. Possibly, Congress actually proposed creating a drone corps as a branch of the U.S. Army. I mean, talk about Back to the Future. If you guys recall, the United States Air Force started out as the Army Air Corps. So, do we have a drone corps for every service? Is this something that the Air Force takes on because maybe that makes the most sense? I don't know these answers, but
I'll throw a
go
shout
ahead.
out to Mike Brabner, Colonel over at Army Aviation, really taking the lead on some of that stuff. And we see the PBAS, the purpose-built attritable system stuff, really starting to come in. I mean, I'm sorry for interrupting. We're at the 3-year anniversary of the beginning of the full-scale invasion, and
Right.
we're at a point now where Big Army is starting to get on board with the use of these small attritable systems. And for me, that's a huge changing of the page in terms of, hey, these are a curiosity to, hey, we're going to turn them into a doctrine. That's huge on our side.
Well, it absolutely is. And, Eben, I think it was you that mentioned, kind of this technology iteration and the pace of this just over a 3-year period. I hate to say it, but I will, our bureaucratic system, at least right now, across the DoD is not set up to deal with this. I mean, we've seen the Defense Innovation Unit pop up. We've got SoftWorks, we've got AFWorks, and, how is that going? Where are we on Replicator? ? Like, these are all rhetorical questions, but we've heard big talk about, we're going to have a bunch of small attritable drones because that's what everybody's, we're going to have swarms. That's what everybody's doing. But where are we on any of that? And I guess another question I have, I'd love to just throw it out there. I know we got to go to the next article, but this is so, like, fires me up. The question is, under Trump 2.0, what's this going to look like going forward? In terms of investments in domestic technologies. I already saw, what was it, DIU that said they're renaming, what is it called? The autonomy. There's an autonomy portfolio. There's 2 portfolios, and they're already, like, restructuring one of them. It's like, okay, not sure, but we are at 18 minutes, so I want to keep this flowing. The next article actually dives right back into this technology. But before we get to it, Tom, do you have any kind of closing remarks on your article?
Not really on the article, because I think we covered it pretty well, but just on that last comment you said, yes, as we have a big bureaucratic government and the acquisition systems are very, very slow to respond. However, I will say that the Army in particular, but also all branches of our service, are putting the innovation in the hands of the warfighter, and they're very, very good at that, right? So while our processes for acquisition are slow and need to be resolved to help with this, getting technology in the hands of the warfighter, having them play with it, that's what we've learned from Ukraine, and that's what our troops are doing right now, and they're doing it very well, right? So we're not behind, but there are ways we can align our bureaucracy with that warfighting mentality, and that's kind of what I see Trump 2.0 or Hegseth, et cetera, doing, is saying, look, let's focus on being warfighters, and let's figure out the right way to do that. So I have hope that over the next few years, we'll funnel some of our bureaucracy into the ability to continue to keep our warfighters front and center.
Well, and if I have a hope, it's that Congress will actually infuse some cash into the domestic manufacturing of the technologies we need. We've seen a lot of sticks, not a lot of carrots. When you talk about Chinese tech, etc., that's a whole nother conversation. So maybe that's another show. We can talk about that later. All right, let's get to that second article. All right, now this is Bryan. This one's yours, so go ahead and take it away.
Yeah, so I chose this as an example because there's a lot of these. There's a lot of kind of, hey, I as a reporter went out and hung out with this crack drone unit, and they're doing this this up close personal work, and I think the main reason I wanted to bring this stuff up has to do with like returning that humanity into the loop when it comes to technology, because a lot of technology came about as a way to further distance the human from that point of impact and like making it safer for the warfighter. FPV is not safe for the warfighter. I mean, we're talking about relatively short ranges. I mean, when you're talking about going for a jog, it's not a marathon, but it's definitely more than a short sprint. So when you're that close to the enemy, you're in a very dangerous situation. But you're also very, very personal with the folks who are being, for lack of a better word, hunted. And I think that's the term that's used in this article. And that's what kind of stood out to me is like, this is, young people sitting in a fob or a plywood structure somewhere with these goggles on, playing what ostensibly is kind of video game skills, using these video game skills, having their vape and going after other human beings like them on the other side. And their highest kind of score kill is another operator just like them. The skill of these operators, like when you have somebody go out, like I used to bring, I actually took Rolling Stone out to some of these things when I was going out to do my observations, my investigations. I could load up my car and take some folks, and it reminded me. I mean, it was Rolling Stone is the thing that did that Generation Kill, for the last. If you haven't seen it, it's an amazing miniseries. I think it's HBO, but it really kind of, for a lot of people, defines that generation of warfighter. And the article that you have here kind of defines this generation of warfighter in the FPV fight. There's different ways to using these drones. It's one of the things about FPV is there's a huge flexibility. These articles tend to focus on a very specific use case, kind of along the front line or the forward line of troops, where there's like that no man's land between sets of trenches. This is where a lot of the hunting goes on, whether it's for vehicles or for individuals. In this case, it really focuses on going after individuals, and that the counter UAS of dodging. And it's honestly, it's terrible. Like, it's terrible to see. Like, I have good friends. I think the next article references Magyar's birds. Like, my best friend in the war was fighting with Magyar and was killed last month. So, like, these things, there's this huge human factor to it. Like, there is a cat and mouse that's happening on the RF spectrum, on the technology, kind of overleaps, where there's kind of a couple weeks of uncertainty as fiber optic comes in or whatever the new technology is. And then that'll be really effective for a little while, and then something will make it more difficult, and something will come up to mitigate that. And this snapshot of time where there are small FPV units having large effect on the battlefield, I think it's relatively, I'd like to think that it's going to be limited based on the response that, like you guys are just talking about, is this counter UAS response. Like, there's a lot of people. I was just at the European Defense Tech Hackathon in Munich. It was like 45 minutes away from the security conference. And a lot of people are focusing on, like, how do we detect these FPVs? How do we mitigate the FPVs? How do we make it more difficult for them to be effective on target? And whether it's jamming or all these different, different approaches, and now it's like, how are we going to do fiber? How are we going to overcome fiber? So whatever the new thing is that gives you a leg up, the enemy is immediately working on this. The cautionary note I'll make in here is that the U.S. is not participating in that. So, and this is, I'm getting on my soapbox for a second, so you stop me when I need to. But it's one of the things that has had me really lean into working with Orqa FPV on some of the things that they're doing. They're supplying into our U.S. DoD, our defense capability, is that direct iteration. Like, you can visit Ukraine once, you can go out there, whatever, but Croatia has special forces guys. We have special forces guys who are fighting over there, who are retired. Like, I'm not saying active duty guys, but there's a constance of this iteration. It's not a single iteration. And unless you are working with that constantly and diligently working to improve kind of the lives of these guys who are trying to liberate their country, it's really hard to stay relevant in the space. You can have the best FPV stuff today, but unless you are actively participating in this cat and mouse, which there's obviously risk related to, if you're not participating in that, your relevance drops away in weeks, if not, or months, if not weeks. And I think that in the U.S. generally the OEMs and such, it does take quite a bit to participate in that, a bit of commitment and a bit of risk, and that's really hard to articulate. So anyway, that's kind of what I wanted to get in. I won't go down that road too much further, but you get what I'm saying about just the iterative constants.
Yeah, no, Bryan, all that was great. I'm going to hand it over to Eben. I mean, Eben, you've and obviously Tom too. You've been developing technology. You said you helped develop the underlying tech that became Echodyne eventually. As you're looking at the technology and iterations, like what do you find interesting about it in Ukraine, and as kind of connected to this article Bryan has put forward?
Yeah, well, I guess the FPV thing is certainly very interesting. And, when I think when the war first started, it was mostly, bigger drones, group 2 size drones, certainly, that were flying at relatively high altitudes and then coming down, raining down on Ukraine. And so they developed systems. They were mostly, RF controlled. So they had comms links back. So they started to develop systems, to protect against those. And some of those systems included, FPVs that would take out the other drone, right? Which some of those videos are amazing to watch with the, FPV basically flying directly above, a Russian attack drone, and then taking it out, just like they can take out, ground systems or ground vehicles. But then, as we've said, the tech has just continued to develop. So you start with a radio controlled or a comms link controlled drone, and then it's like, okay, well, can I detect those comms links? So we develop RF detectors, right? And everybody's selling RF detection systems. And if I can detect the RF, then can I jam the RF? So then you have jammers, right? And then the other side says, okay, well, maybe I should fly by GPS waypoint instead of flying by by a comms link. And so now what am I going to do, right? And so then they start using, air defense radars and other systems to be able to detect those non-radio controlled drones. And then you move to the FPVs, and it's like, okay, well, now I've got FPVs. They're much shorter range. Same developments take place. You've got RF detectors. Well, they're still flying by radio links. They're short range radio links, but that's how they're communicating back and sending the video back. So I can develop RF detection systems to detect that, and then I can potentially jam those to make the FPVs less efficient, right? And then of course we're going to move on to fiber optically controlled. So now I can have that constant link to my FPV without any comms link. Okay, well, now what am I going to do? Because I'm not shedding RF signal that can be detected, and you can't jam me. So what are you going to do now? And we'll talk about that in the future. But it's the pace of this innovation is just unbelievable, right? I mean, it's not unbelievable because necessity breeds it. But how closely are we tracking that? As the U.S., if we were in a situation like this, would we innovate at this pace? Because this war is showing that speed of innovation is going to be required. With these autonomous systems, the rate at which they're making these changes is just remarkable. And industry has picked up, but necessity is driven it.
I think that's true. And I think we've seen this in other conflicts at different times and different contexts. Right? The United States Air Force was born out of the Army out of need. And so we're seeing this evolution. And I love the cat and mouse, the spy versus spy, all of these different kind of visuals going in my brain of what is happening over there. Tom, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this one.
Yeah, this article, what this one really hit home, and Bryan touched on it too, and on two aspects. There's the human element to it, right?
Yeah.
I remember back in the day dropping bombs in anger, right? Was it 8 or 10,000 feet, dropping a laser gun, a guided bomb? I didn't see my victim. Now you're sort of looking him in the eyes through FPV, so there's certainly going to be an effect on our warfighters.
You are looking them in the eye.
Yeah, exactly.
And it stays with you.
Yeah, and it's a very different type of thing. The other thing that I saw in this article that it hit home about is this isn't the end game, right? Because you still got to have boots on the ground. You've still got to occupy and protect and keep that territory, which means we've got to continue to evolve the technology so that it could be in the hands of the warfighter, not at the back behind the battlefield, right? So it's continual evolution, but then keeping it small and portable and mobile for the soldier who's on the ground, because that's the end line of occupation or of defense. And that came out pretty clear, I thought, in the article in certain parts.
Awesome. Thank you, Bryan. I'm going to kind of hand it back over to you to close out this particular article that you selected.
I think the important thing to me is that there's hundreds of these groups of young men or young people who are doing all this, and these are 19, 20-year-olds and older folks who've been, like, this war has been going on since 2014 in reality, in eastern Ukraine, and the effect, like what we're talking about, is it's generational. Like, this is multiple generations now. The guys who are out fighting right now is the young folks. I mean, they were children or not even born when some of this stuff happened. The effect of the long-term effect on society, like this is a full-scale war, that these technologies are allowing them to defend themselves, but there's a lot of work to be done after the fact as well.
Yeah, Bryan, I do want to thank you for bringing this article up, and as Tom also kind of echoed, the human element of this. Like, I think that's something that's lost when we have technology. When the focus seems to always be on the drones themselves and not on, like you said, the young man, or in some cases, I imagine still young women out there, wearing these goggles and like you said, looking their adversary in the eye before they're dropping, maybe a grenade from that FPV drone right on that person's head and watching it. The long-term impacts mentally, the long-term impacts physically of those that also are, targeted themselves, the long-term impacts on society. We don't know what those are yet. And so thank you for raising that. I'm sorry, by the way, for your loss of your friend. Yeah. I mean,
I
just,
yeah. I think the important thing is to temper, like, because I do run into a lot of people who are fascinated and almost gleeful about the innovation, and they just need to understand that innovation is coming at the cost of human beings. I think that's the thing to temper that with. It's okay to learn, because we have to learn to be better, but we don't have to be excited or I don't know how to really articulate that, but there's a distastefulness to it. And
it's not antiseptic, right? It's not just robots on robots that we're talking about here.
Yet
there's always a human piece of this, and not even to mention, of course, the civilians that are caught in the middle of all of this, frankly, in both countries. I mean, let's call it what it is, right? So thanks again. I'm going to take a 2-second break here, and once again thank our sponsors, Anello Photonics, Caresoft, and GeneX, for making this stream possible. We really appreciate you guys. And once again, everybody, if you didn't watch the live stream from those various events where we had showcased those, CES and Geo Week, please go back and look at those really great shows. Again, possible by those folks. So, all right, we're going to go to our last but not least article. This is one that, Eben, you selected. And, as you kind of go down, we talked more generically about the first drone war and kind of what we're seeing out there in terms of Ukraine, and then drilled down a little bit more in terms of FPV and the implications of that and the technology iteration. And now, Eben, you've got this interesting article you selected. Tell us about it. And it seems to be kind of the next phase of this conversation.
Yeah, well, I think this is one of the most recent phases. And, as we talked about the FPV drones, originally the FPV drones, and we say originally, that was like, 2 years ago, the FPV drones, or maybe 2.5, is the original, were all radio controlled, right? So you've got a comms link and you're controlling your drone via the comms link, and you're getting your video back via that comms link. And that's how you're, flying this FPV drone to its target. And that, then was countered with radio detection systems and RF jammers that would basically block those signals, making the drone harder to fly, making them easier to detect. And so, of course, the newest innovation, which probably most of our listeners are well aware of, is fiber optically controlled drones. So you've got a canister sitting on the drone that's basically laying out a really thin, spider web thin, fiber optic cable out behind, so that you no longer are relying on those comms links. So now the drone can be managed perfectly well over fiber, never losing signal, and it's undetectable because you're not radiating any RF signal. And so now what do you do to counter that? And so this article that I sent in is about this Ukrainian drone group team that is that has deployed some radars specifically to detect these, because radar is bouncing its signals off of the physical object, and so if that physical object is there, you're going to see it. And so that's what they're using now to detect these. And once they've detected it and are starting to track it, they are launching their own FPV out and go take it out. So it's very much small drone, small drone, one being controlled by a fiber optic cable and the second being controlled probably by a normal comms link. And they're claiming great success with this, and saying what we need to do is deploy these all along on the front. We're having these drone v drone wars. So anyway, that's the article. It just speaks to a couple of things. One is this continuing innovation and the speed of innovation of cat and mouse, et cetera, and having to counter it. But it also speaks to the fact that the sensors that you're using need to be capable of detecting the threat, regardless of what it's using as its radio links or communication links. So.
Great stuff, Eben. Thank you. And by the way, fun fact, last month we focused on the theme of robotics. And because drones are essentially flying robots, we had one of our guests select an article exactly about the fiber optic FPV drones. So we did have some discussion about that last month, but what you've raised is, now, as you call it, the cat and mouse, spy versus spy, now the radar solution to detect those. So really interesting. Tom, I'm going to go to you next. Tell me what your thoughts are on this one.
I thought it was I thought it was interesting, and I think Eben, as you pointed out, I don't want to say iteration, but the cyclical nature sort of things, right? Like, so we have this great innovation around fiber optic control to eliminate the RF, and now we're using RF controlled drones to shoot it. And then also the balance between new technology as well as kind of the cost of that technology, because you sort of now take a step back because you've gained capability with the FP, but you lost a little bit of capability because of the additional equipment you've got to carry to support the reel, the spool, etc. So you're losing range, or you're having to have bigger equipment. So it was just an interesting, for me, technology ponderance of seeing how it's a little bit cyclical, right? There are certain things we have today, just like I mentioned earlier, that physical mesh, that's a real retreat in technology, but it helps against some really advanced technology. So it's not that we're moving towards a technology that's the best technology. It's that as more layers of technology are brought in, different layers of technology are used to defend against it. And I found that very intriguing and worth thinking about how things move forward. The other thing I just wanted to point out, and we've not touched on this at all, and it's not in any of our articles, is when we think about all this stuff we've been talking today, and in particular the fiber optic driven kind of things, now how do we take that and look at any potential conflict in the South Pacific, Southeast Asia, right, where you have distance as your enemy, and a lot of these technologies are near-term technologies. So our acquisition forces and our military has to think in both realms, and that's a really unique challenge.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point, Tom. I mean, kind of going back to your original article on the idea of strategy and doctrine, it's almost like the lawyer thing. It depends, right? Like, and not every theater is the same, and you have to adjust to the environment and the circumstances, and of course the adversary that you're fighting and what they have and what they don't have. So, you know, a lot of lessons learned from Ukraine, some of which may not actually translate to the Pacific theater. So that's an excellent point, actually. Bryan, I want to go to you. Before we do, though, I want to mention we've got Michelle Duquette out there. She has asked for the articles. We will provide you guys with the links to these as well. And Bryan gave us a really great YouTube channel on the Magyar birds. It's Magyar's YouTube channel. So check that out. We'll be dropping all these links for you. But Bryan, back over to you.
Yeah, just you know, I don't want to keep harping on the humanity, but the technology was come up by somebody, right? Like this technology's out there, but I'm going to do another shout out to a buddy, Tony Smothers, who's a volunteer out in Ukraine. There's a couple articles about him recently. He's been working this for about a year, trying to push this technology. And sometimes we have technology that's not quite ready for the battlefield, or the battlefield's quite ready for the technology. And this is one of the logistics humps a lot of times that is ignored at folks' peril is, all right, you have a cool thing. How difficult is it going to be to train everybody up on that or to incorporate that into a system? We're talking about, you know,
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Bryan, but you're focusing on the fiber optics right now.
In general, yeah. So this technology, the thing that makes fiber optic better than, like, let's say a completely different radio system, for example, we don't have to learn a different radio system. We now have this thing that's basically a drop-in. So Tony's bringing this, or the guys who are adopting fiber optics are taking something that swaps in, like there's no like need to use it. It's a very low footprint when it comes to the logistics of rolling it out to people and having units take it on. There still has to be a little bit of hand-holding, but it's a really good example of how an iterative technology can work its way into the battlefield in such a way that does not create more failure points. So this is always the balance for me, is when you have new features, every feature is a potential failure point. So you have to think about those things carefully. There's a cost related to it, whether it's the training cost, the money cost, the cost of extra weight of having to carry it, and then that weight affects the drones, the FPV drones from having range. All of these things come into question. And so I'm excited about fiber optics. I think that there's a lot of interesting things going on there. I'm also, I hate to say excited about the fact that folks are starting to counter it, but this is the ongoing, I don't want to call it a game, but it's the ongoing issue of what works and what doesn't. And then when I'm looking at a technology and whether or not it's going to be applicable to other theaters, it does come down to a lot of those logistics, a lot of that lift, and a lot of the retooling that's necessary in our defense posture. I just think they're doing a really good job with this particular case.
No, it's great stuff. I'm going to go back over to Eben here in a second, but I was like, I mentioned Replicator earlier, and I just remember there were so many commercial drone companies that were like joyful, right? Like, oh, this is our shot to have some cool DoD contracts and whatnot. And then when they put out the RFP for it, was like, you have to be able to fly over 100 nautical miles or something, right? So people are like, well, shit, this is like, we can't do that. And I think, like, when you think about these FPV drones, you think about, of course, fiber optic cables. Are you flying across the Pacific with those? Probably not. But Eben, I'd like to get back to you, close out this article, because, at the end of the day, look, we're talking like 30 days or so for them to come up with this radar solution to try to defeat the fiber optic solution that people, kind of created because their radio links were being found and whatnot. What do you think in terms of going forward? I don't know if you guys are developing something on the radar side to address this. But again, even so, like, how short-lived might that be, with the iteration we're seeing?
Yeah, well, I think, of course, we're working on things and have things as well. But we won't talk about that on the show. But looking at talking about like the longer distance things, right? Yeah. The next iteration, which obviously people are already doing, is if you're taking out a larger target, if you're trying to hit a facility, for example, instead of an individual person who's actually trying to take evasive maneuvers to get away from you, you can send a drone there by GPS, right? They've been doing that for years now, many years. Yeah, sure. And that's gonna move to optical, right? And so it's like, hey, here's the image of the specific asset I want you to take out. Fly to this GPS location, use the use some really simple computer vision optical AI to like find that target and take it out. And if your chain of command authorizes you that that's the most you have to have, and you don't actually have to see it before it, it detonates, like that's on the horizon, right? And so if you need to fly, you're going to fly long range missions, right, and take out a specific asset. You want to take out a specific type of vehicle. You want to take out a specific type of aircraft. God forbid you take out an individual that you aren't even confirming, right, exists or not. Like that's all doable, and it's all completely, RF silent, right? So you're never going to see it from an RF standpoint. So
just to
go ahead, Bryan. Yeah.
Just to piggyback that, because I think it illustrates kind of a disconnect here in the U.S. Neither of those things are possible in modern combat. You can't go to a location by GPS. GPS is jammed.
You'll be jammed, right?
Yeah, so you can't do visual guidance because things are camouflaged or things are set up. Like there is ways to get around the ability. Like you might be able to hit a building, but you might not know what building it is. There's a lot of things that go into this. Like when we talk about computer vision, I believe in computer vision in certain circumstances and certain terminal guidance capabilities. But the efficacy of those things has been largely mitigated in like a year ago. And I feel like there is a large disconnect coming to the U.S. on the industrial side of we're building for problems that either don't no longer exist, or they've evolved into new problems where the solutions that were novel a year or two ago are in the grand pace of this ongoing war in Ukraine and Russia. It's like the Stone Age. Like we're talking about technologies that are very, very ineffective, especially considering the effort that goes into setting those things up. They also present like a lot of security issues that are not ideal for modern war. And I don't mean to be critical in terms of like the idea, but there is, I think, largely culturally there's this disconnect of like we're taking kind of legacy ideas what should work against this problem and not taken into account because we're not there. If you're not in Ukraine, if you're not dealing with these things, like you are largely shielded because of operational security, because of whatever, obfuscation or just the noise that is associated with the intelligence operations. You don't necessarily know where our limits are and where those where the challenges are. And this gets into the procurement and stuff like that. That when you get into like people who are developing out programs and procurements is how are they writing their requirements? Like, do they even know what war is anymore? Like they're writing it based on our last war. In our last war, we've never fought against a peer, and we might have to face a peer someday. And I think that is the big change that I want to see when it comes to Replicator, when it comes to DIU or any of these kind of efforts to innovate. I want us to not be assuming supremacy or air superiority when we're going into these procurement cycles, because we just can't with the technology the way things are today.
Yeah, look, CQ Brown, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, just been, given his fire notice. But, when he was chief of the United States Air Force, the first document he put out was literally like innovate or lose. Like it literally had that title. And, I was a JAG at the time and I was like, holy shnikes, that's pretty direct. And whoever says lose, but like he saw this, and I'm talking 6+ years ago, where he's saying like and he said, we need to be looking ahead. We need to be seeing what's happening, and we cannot rely on what has worked before. The guy's brilliant. Sorry to see him go, fellow airman. But hey, life moves on. Speaking of moving on,
I just make one
go ahead, Eben, real quick.
Brian's point, which we're all completely valid in a war zone, especially like front lines where everything's camoed absolutely and GPS denied. But I mean, people are talking about protecting critical infrastructure in Western Europe and in the United States using, just RF detection. It's like, guys, if you actually want to take that out, there are a million other ways that you can do it without without just using RF. And those buildings are not camoed. I mean, we have aircraft that are easily visible, at military bases, and So yeah.
Yeah, no, huge caveat there. Thank you for pointing that out, because I think that we rely on a lot of these systems for our own, like for civil society, right? Like we're not going to be shutting down GPS in Western Europe so that somebody won't be able to guide a missile into a theoretical thing. I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Very exposed. Yeah. So I was not talking from front lines. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. This was like an amazing conversation, as I knew it would be. Thank you all for joining us. What I want to do is super quick, do a round robin around the room. We'll start with Tom. Just kind of closing remarks. And of course, please let people know how they can reach you. So Tom, to you first. And you are muted, my friend, somehow.
Sorry, I had a train going by. I had to mute and I forgot.
No worry.
You can reach me you can go to our website, sagetech.com. You can find me on LinkedIn, Tom Furey, or under Sagetech. So that's the easy part. And I just want to say this has been a great conversation. I appreciate it. You guys, Bryan, been out on the front line, and Eben with leading edge technology, and it's great to partner with you in certain areas. I just want to double down a little bit maybe on something that Bryan said in his last comment, and that's, I don't know if you noticed, we've been in combat forever against people that it was a one-sided combat, and we've gotten used to that. And then we started using the term near peer. It's not near peer. It's peer. We're going to be fighting against enemies who are at the same level or advanced from us in terms of technology, and we've got to start thinking that way, and we've got to lose some of the arrogance in the way we put together our warfighting plans and our technology roadmaps, and we need to do it soon.
You're here. Eben, over to you.
Yeah, I'd just say on the counter side, we've got to be innovating rapidly. And we've got to be choosing the right sets of counter equipment to deal with these threats, right? That the common and most easy approach is not going to be the approach that solves the problem in the end, right? So we need to be ahead of it. And to your point, Don, what are we doing to really drive the defense industrial base here in the U.S., especially the small companies? We could have a whole nother discussion about the valley of death and how small innovative companies cross that. With help from people like DIU and others, and also just buying the right equipment, right?
Yeah, 100%. Thank you, Eben. Bryan.
Man, every time I think I know what I'm going to say, they say something, I'm like, oh, that's a good point. I want to expand on. But just tagging on what Eben was just saying about finding the right equipment. The time I spent over there was evaluating technology and look at stuff and the efficacy and things that could improve and whatever. What I found was, from my perspective, the individual solution today is much less interesting to me as where they've been and where they're going. Like, you see what I'm looking for in these companies and these people, because it just comes back to the people who are making the technology, right? It's how fast are they iterating? How fast are they able to bring something from an idea into a product and get it out there for use? The Defense Tech Hackathon in Munich a week or so ago, the question from the Ukrainian delegation every time when they raise their hand to ask a question of these, how soon can you get it to the front line? We need it today. And this 24-hour turnaround of like, hey, we need a new solution. Again, this is every day has a cost to it. Like, people are being killed. I mean, as we're on the phone here. So investing in those small companies, finding the ones who are willing to really innovate, and not just kind of innovate, not just like make up a new spec sheet and say, hey, we're going to have this thing, but it's actually going to be fielded in 2027. I'm talking about like people who are building things today. There are people building stuff today, but getting the money, getting the support for folks like that to turn it into a solution that's actually going to be useful for our warfighters today, when the procurement is looking at, all right, but is it going to be useful in 10 years? We have no idea, so we're not going to invest in it. Yeah, but we need it today still. Like, it still has to happen today. Otherwise, we're waiting for a perfect solution that's never going to present itself without those iterative steps. So focus on the people, their ability to solve problems quickly. I think we're going to be in a really good spot.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think Bryan or Eben, either one of you, said how folks can reach you. So Eben, back to you, then Bryan, and then I'm going to close us out.
Oh yeah. Also on LinkedIn website, eben@echodyne.com.
Awesome. Thank you, Bryan.
Cool. Bryan at orqafpv.com. I'm also on LinkedIn.
All right. So very good. Thank you so much. And you can join these folks. I'm pretty sure Sagetech will have a presence at Exponential. I know Eben and Bryan both, I believe you guys are on the same exact panel for my Law Tech Connect workshop at Expo on Monday, May 19th. If you all haven't signed up for that, you absolutely should. Early bird prices now. And oh, by the way, you get a happy hour Sunday night and a 3-day Expo Hall pass. So you can't really beat it. A full week of activities for basically $250. So please join us. Next month, by the way, we are dedicating the show to the theme of cyber. We're going to have Dark Wolf Solutions, Mobilicom, and Professor Gary Korn, retired U.S. Army Judge Advocate, was the first JAG to lead and advise U.S. Cyber Command. He's now a law professor in the D.C. area. So what a conversation that's going to be. Mark your calendars now. It'll be the last Tuesday of the month, 11 a.m. Eastern. That's all she wrote. By the way, one quick other fun fact, article about what happened in D.C. And airspace awareness, kind of collaborated with Tom on that. That's going to be coming out on Autonomy Global, I think, as early as next week. So once again, follow us there. Keep following the crew. Tomorrow on the Dawn of Autonomy, we've got Brett Gardner from GeneXt, who's one of our sponsors today. And I'll just end with that. Thanks again, GeneXt, Anello, and Caresoft for the show. That's all she wrote. Thank you, gentlemen. We are out here.